Every year, this country takes time to pause and reflect upon the life and legacy of a man who made a true difference in the lives of all Americans. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was raised during a time in our country when treating people differently because of the color of their skin was not just accepted in certain places, but it was actually very common. It was a different America back then, and the America that we know today exists only because of the hard work, dedication, and sacrifice of people like Dr. King, people who are not afraid to stand up and spread the message to everyone that America can and should be a place of true freedom, a place where people of all colors and backgrounds will live together in peace, a place where everyone will feel included and accepted for who they are, no matter where they are from or what they may look like. Fortunately, the United States was able to eventually change its laws so that all people could have better opportunities here, and there would be serious consequences for anyone who still tried to take those opportunities away from African American citizens or from their communities. This law was called the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and it would not have been possible without the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But there were other people involved in this effort who were just as important. And did you know that one of those people was born and raised in Pekin, Illinois? I want you to know the name Everett Dirksen, and I want you to remember that name and remember the story that I'm going to tell you for the rest of your life, because I truly believe that it can make a difference for you. It certainly has for me. But first, I want to show you where I get to work every day. Come, follow me. So these are the Dirksen Center archives, and this room right here is a big reason for why this building exists today. The Dirksen Center used to be in the Pekin Public Library, but throughout the years, the organization grew its mission, and so it outgrew its space. So this room here is where we keep all of the congressional papers collections that we maintain today. You're probably studying history in school right now, and maybe you've wondered who writes our history books and who does the work of discovering the truth about what happened so many years ago. Well, professional researchers and historians come to places like the Dirksen Center to learn all about those facts. You know, a senator is somebody who represents his or her state in Washington, D.C., and each state gets to send only 2 senators to Washington, D.C., which means that at any given time, there are only 100 senators in the whole country, and Senator Dirksen from Pekin, Illinois, was one of them. So follow me down here, and I will show you what kind of things we have from Senator Dirksen's collection. Look at all of these boxes. All of these boxes contain folders, and all of those folders contain papers, and these papers hold the information that historians use to piece together things that happened a really long time ago, laws that were passed, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and other legislation that has made such a big impact on our country. Papers related to that are here because Senator Dirksen served in Washington, D.C. for a really long time. And, you know, people are still trying to understand what happened a long time ago and to better understand what happened a long time ago so that we can continue to learn the lessons that we need to learn today from our past. But papers are not the only thing that we have here. And come and let me show you all of this really cool stuff. Elected officials and public servants accumulate a lot of things when they're in office, and these aisles represent some of those things that Senator Dirksen accumulated while he was in public service. Look at here. This is Dirksen's hat from when he served in World War I. This piece is a little over 100 years old. Can you believe that? And over here, we have an original copy of the Time magazine that was issued in June of 1964, just after the Civil Rights Act was passed. And you know, the fact that Dirksen was featured on the cover of this issue really illustrates just how important he was to the entire effort. Here's a fun fact about Dirksen. He actually won a Grammy. Now this is broken, but maybe you've seen one of these before. Grammys are awards that are typically given to accomplished musicians, and though Dirksen wasn't a musician, he loved the arts, and he recorded an album called Gallant Men, and in the category of Best Spoken Word, he won a Grammy. Oh, and look at all of these elephants. You know, the elephant is the symbol of the Republican Party, and Everett Dirksen was a Republican, and as such, he had lots of elephant trinkets. Many of them were gifts, I'm sure, collector's items, and some of them that you see up front that have the names of other Republican officials engraved on them. These were trinkets that were given away at various campaign events in the 1950s and the 1960s. We have more things back here of other elected officials whose papers and archives and memorabilia we maintain. But what I really want to show you next is my most favorite pieces of Dirksen memorabilia. But they're out in the main lobby, so let's head that way and we'll get to it. So right over here is Dirksen's desk from Washington that we had delivered here to Pekin all the way from our nation's capital. And it looks very different from a member of Congress's desk that you would see today. For example, in place of a computer, we have a typewriter. This is what Dirksen used to put together all of his letters and all of his correspondence, and there's no spell check on this. In the middle here, you'll see correspondence from constituents. Again, this represents a very different time when people had concerns about what was happening in Washington, D.C. They would write letters to their representatives and put them in the mail, and then elected officials would go through that mail one by one. Today, you would probably just send an email if you wanted to communicate with your member of Congress. This telephone is, again, something very different. Anytime Dirksen wanted to speak to somebody and they weren't in the same room as him, he had to do it right from his desk. There were no cell phones, and this is the phone that he used to get in touch with people when he needed to speak with them. Of course, Dirksen was a lover of history as well, and Abraham Lincoln was somebody who he followed closely and looked up to, so we have many of Dirksen's books about Abraham Lincoln that he turned to for inspiration and for material when he was giving speeches on the Senate floor and trying to persuade his colleagues to go along with all the various things that he believed in. And last but not least, these are artificial marigolds, and they adorn Dirksen's desk because Dirksen, for many years, tried to have the marigold be established as the national flower. He didn't succeed in making it the national flower, but you know, Pekin has sort of picked up that legacy for him, and that's the reason why our annual community festival is called the Marigold Festival. So as I mentioned earlier, Dirksen, like Martin Luther King Jr., was an essential force in passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which helped turn our country away from a culture of discrimination. You see, when this country makes new laws, lawmakers like Dirksen come from all over the country, and they have to vote on ideas. If an idea has enough votes, then it can become a law. But if it doesn't have enough votes, then things just sort of stay the same. Everett Dirksen shared the same ideas of equality and anti-discrimination as Martin Luther King Jr., and it was Dirksen's job to help turn those ideas into actual laws. Unfortunately, it's a lot more complicated than it sounds. People from the North versus people from the South versus Democrats versus Republicans, they all had different ideas about this issue. But Dirksen was just the man for the job to help bring so many different voices together. Let me tell you a little bit about Dirksen's upbringing in Pekin. He was born in 1896 to first-generation immigrants right here in town. He was one of 5 brothers, and his father passed away when Dirksen was very young, leaving his mother to raise her children all on her own. He grew up in a little home on Hamilton Street, which is still there today, and it's in a part of town that was once given the nickname of Bonschviertel, which means Beantown in German. Beantown got its name because all of the German immigrants who lived there grew large vegetable gardens right in their own yards. They did this as a function of their German heritage, but also out of necessity. Immigrants like the Dirksens had to be resourceful and careful about when and where they spent their money. Young Dirksen was the only one of his brothers to go to high school, and he attended Pekin Community High School. He had always been a dedicated reader and truly loved to learn. He graduated number 2 in his entire class, first among the boys, and then he went on to attend law school for a little bit before enlisting to serve in the military in World War I. In the late 1920s, Dirksen ran for a seat on the Pekin City Council, and he was the top vote getter. His experience there helped him to believe that a life of public service was just the thing for him, and he spent the rest of his life in that kind of profession. He spent many years representing Central Illinois in the U.S. House of Representatives, and then several more years after that representing the entire state of Illinois in the U.S. Senate. There are a lot of things that I could say about how Dirksen accomplished everything that he did, up to and including passage of the Civil Rights Act, but here's what I think is most important for you to know. Dirksen believed in bipartisanship, which means that he wanted Democrats and Republicans to win together. And he also believed in compromise. Dirksen saw all of his fellow senators as human beings first, and everything else about them came second. He was generous and kind. He was gentle, he never threatened, and he always listened. Even when he disagreed with someone, he tried to understand them no matter how differently they saw things. He treated all of his fellow humans with the utmost respect, and he never called a person names. In essence, he treated all lawmakers the very same way that he wanted everyday citizens like you and me to treat each other. And I believe that that is what made all the difference. On that evening in June of 1964, just before the senators cast their votes on whether or not to approve the Civil Rights Act, Dirksen stood up and gave a speech that included these words. "There occurs to me," he said, "a line from an English poet whose name is John Donne. He left what I believe was a precious legacy on the parchments of history. He said, 'Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind.'" Dirksen continued, "I am involved in mankind, and whatever the skin, we are all involved in mankind. Equality of opportunity must prevail." Because of Dirksen's very important position in the Senate and because of his exceptional character, he made a difference for you and for me and for all future generations, because it's that kind of approach that brings people together to form common ideas that can change the world. And speaking of changing the world, I want for each and every person listening to this to know that you have a lot more in common with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Senator Everett Dirksen than you may think. And I hope that by learning about this boy from Pekin who went to Washington, D.C. and made a really big difference, that you'll start to see things that way. The truth is this: we are all a lot more alike than we are different, and that's really the point that Dr. King was trying to make all along. King had a dream, and Dirksen had a plan. Together, they helped shape our reality for today. But always, there is more work to do, and now it is up to us to continue the progress that was made by the great men and women who came before us. Only we can keep that dream alive now. And with that, I'll let Senator Dirksen have the last word.
All this is then by way of saying that the job of freedom in all its glorious aspects never seems to be quite consummated. Freedom and its habiliments, its attributes, right of a free citizen to vote, is somehow a battle that is never quite fully won in any time or generation. And so now the torch is lighted for us, and the mantle falls on our shoulders to carry on where those before us left off. Thank you.